As I understand it, you are doing this to overhaul campaign finance reform. You would occupy the presidency for as short as a single day, and then you would resign, handing over to the VP. Explain to me how this would work.
Yeah, well, let's first be clear about what I want to overhaul. We've got a fundamentally broken government. This is what everybody believes. We have the most polarized Congress since the Civil War. We have a Congress that's completely unable to do anything sensible because it's bending over backwards to raise money from the tiniest fraction of the 1%. In this election cycle alone, 400 families have given half the money that's been contributed to the candidates on both sides of the political aisle. This is a system that is deeply flawed, deeply malfunctioning. It's not achieving anything anybody expects it should do. That's why 82% of us agree with Elizabeth Warren's statement, the system is rigged. And what follows from that should be something other than just politics as usual, as if, nothing is wrong. We're just trying to talk about which great ideas we want to elect. Instead, what we need is a campaign that's about fixing this corrupt system first, about addressing this deep corruption. And that's what my campaign's about. What I've said is I'm running if we reach our funding goal by September 7th. I can't remember the month right now, but September 7th. And if we reach that goal, I want to run a campaign that's focused on this basic problem to the way our government doesn't work, and that proposes a reform, fundamental reform that would fix this basic corruption. And once that's passed, once we have a chance to have a democracy back, then I'd step aside and the vice president could become president. But at least I would have a mandate. Nobody would doubt why I was elected. I was elected for one reason. That reason would be to fix this pathological system and get back to a democracy that could work.
So as you said, Congress is polarized. What special tactics would you use to get an otherwise gridlocked Congress to pass your reform package?
Well, we've said that we would elect a referendum president. And we would also, in the context of that campaign, be running at least 50 referendum representative candidates in Republican seats, as independents, as Democrats, wherever we need the votes, so that the people would have a chance to say, not only with the president, but also with the referendum representatives, that they want this system fixed. They want it fixed first. They want to have a chance to have a democracy back. When you look at this incredibly polarized Congress, one of the reasons they are so polarized is that they need to spend all of their time raising money. And when you raise money, the simplest way to raise money is to call the other side the devil. But when you spend 30 to 70% of your time calling the other side a devil, you can't turn around and put your arms around somebody's back and try to strike a deal to make it possible for government to work. They are in the campaign mode 100% of the time because they are fundraising 100% of the time. And if we don't address that, all of this other stuff is just fantasy politics. We need somebody to talk about the reality, and the reality is our government is broken, and we have to fix that first.
Do you view yourself as the only one who can save the system?
Yes. I think in the Democratic Party, there's lots of people talking about their wish list of great reforms. Bernie Sanders is talking about his wish list. Martin O'Malley. Hillary Clinton hasn't yet given us her wish list. But all of these are just wishes. What they don't describe is the strategy that gets them a majority that could actually pass this reform. Look, Democrats are going to come in and barring some tsunami, they're going to face a Republican Congress. Well, then that means we need to have a strategy that is appealing beyond the partisan base, that can talk about an issue which you don't have to be a progressive Democrat to agree with, but instead an issue which we find through the polls as they come again and again, that the overwhelming percentage of Americans believe this system is corrupted and want this system fixed.
Now, if the plan would be to pass your presidency on to the VP, and the VP would be picked by the party, why wouldn't a party of entrenched politicians pick a VP who is exactly the opposite of what you stand for? Well,
they can't be the opposite of what I'm standing for, because what I'm standing for is reform. They got to be for reform, too. I won't have such a candidate on my ticket. But you're right. Part of the challenge here is that the vice president then would be a vice president from a particular party. And that's why I've said that the best thing for reform would be if there were a referendum candidate on the other side as well. If we could have two referendum candidates, a Republican and me as a Democrat, and we could be the lead on the ticket, then at least America would know they were going to have the reform that made it possible for them to actually have a government that works. And then, once that happened, I'm all for the ideas of my party being pushed strongly, because I'm not anti-partisan. I think that, in fact, the ideas of my party are better than the ideas of the other party. But my point is, just like way back at the founding of our constitutional republic, they had to step out of their disagreements, and they were profound disagreements, some favoring slavery, some opposed to slavery. In order to build a republic, a government that could actually function, we need the same citizenship. We need the same patriotism right now, the ability to stand above the partisan fight and to recognize, almost like referendum, like a referee calling a timeout. Look, the system's broken, and I want to be a bankruptcy judge who comes in and reorganizes the system and then gives it back to the politicians so they can go on with the business as usual.
So who's a good VP pick? I mean, you mentioned Elizabeth Warren, Jon Stewart, Hillary Clinton.
Yeah, well, you know, you got that from our site, and our site says some of this is just to see whether you're paying attention. Nobody really thinks Jon Stewart would be a vice president, although I would be happy to step aside if Jon Stewart wants to be the referendum president candidate, because I think he could actually do a better job in rallying America to this than I'm going to, because nobody knows who I am. But the point is, I think a vice president needs to be somebody who can actually have a vision for what they want this government to do once we actually have a government that can do something. So I would support candidates who are clear about their mission, not triangulating about what, in fact, they think the party stands for, but instead clear and strong to rally the base to make sure we would win in November.
Now, the last time you tried to hack a campaign, it didn't go that well. I want to talk about the May Day experience, where you tried to create a super PAC to end all super PACs. What did you learn from that, and what are you doing differently?
Yeah, so what we did with May Day was the first stage of a two-part experiment. And the question was, could we rally people enough to this idea to make it make sense to try to run a billion-dollar super PAC in 2016? And we didn't do that. But we did learn two really important lessons. Number one, we saw that if you could raise this issue in the context of a primary, ideally in the context of a safe seat primary, then regardless of whether you're a Republican or Democrat, you will pick candidates who are committed to reform over candidates who are not. Those were the two races we won, races where that was the way the issue was framed, and that's how people responded. But number two, really importantly, we found that unless people believed there was something they could actually accomplish, they were not willing to step up and do much. I mean, we saw the dial move. We could show in the polls how this issue became salient and moved a significant number of voters, but not enough to make a difference. And that was partly because, you know, people look at one or two seats and they think, how is this really going to matter? I mean, the most overwhelmingly depressing statistic that we have found about the American public on this issue is that while 96% of Americans say it's important to reduce the influence of money in politics, 91% say they don't believe it's possible. So that's the politics of resignation. Well, what we've learned in this election cycle, and this strategy responds to both of those findings, is number one, we're going to fight this in the primary. We're going to get Democrats to say, what do you believe in? Do you believe in business as usual? Or do you believe in real change? And do you believe in a strategy that could actually make that happen? And number two, what we're going to do in this is to give people a plan they can actually see it could work. I mean, again, I love what Bernie Sanders is talking about. I love the ideas he's pushing. But when I sit there and think about it, I think, come on, there's no chance you can get that done until you fix the system, and you're not even talking about how you're going to fix the system first. So this gives people something they could believe in, and if they do that, our belief is an enormous number of people who are otherwise completely turned off of politics will finally come around and say, this is our chance. It's a chance to get our democracy back, and we need to take it.
You have a number of supporters from within Silicon Valley. Who is your biggest contributor, and how much have they contributed?
Well, you know, as a candidate, the most we can take is the maximum amount, which for 2 cycles is $5,400. There's been a whole bunch of people who've given us that. I'm not sure. I don't actually have the list of those people. But, you know, we have about 5,000 contributors now. And those contributors are everywhere from $5,400 down to $5. I picked up the mail from our post office box today, which we had not even thought about, and found 60 different letters with contributions in it, most of them in the $5 to $10 to $20 range, with incredible notes talking about how they are so depressed with their democracy and they are so excited about the idea of somebody trying to do something about it. And that was a really humbling experience to recognize just how deep and broad the passion for this reform is.
So, Larry, what happens if you don't hit your fundraising goal?
Well, we've set this up the way Kickstarter sets it up. If we don't hit the goal, we'll send the money back. I don't want to take anybody's money unless there's some campaign to run. So unless somebody has said keep the money regardless, their money will come back to them. But we're optimistic that if we can continue to get attention, what we've found is that the more people focus on this, the more they're excited to support it. And I think we'll get to the, we're ahead of the race right now. I think we'll get to our goal by September 7th.
What do you think about the talk of Joe Biden seriously considering a run?
Well, I think it signals the weakness of the otherwise putative frontrunner, which is Hillary Clinton. Joe has been a strong supporter of reform, and I welcome his voice, his reform voice in this mix. But I think, again, what people are going to feel is this just another ordinary politician talking about reform, or is this something different? I think the biggest example to focus on here is actually Donald Trump, not Joe Biden or Bernie Sanders. I mean, look, Donald Trump talks about a lot of crazy ideas. But the fact that he strikes people as credible when he says, yeah, all these guys are bought, I used to buy them, I think is a signal of just how desperate people are to find a candidate who they feel is actually saying the truth. And that's what Donald Trump is saying. Now, Trump's solution is that we elect a bunch of billionaires, which, I think we had that debate. It was called the Revolutionary War, and we won, and those who believed in billionaires running our government lost. They went back to Britain. But he's identified the problem in exactly the right way. And I think the chance in 2016 is to give people the idea that we could have actually people from outside the system who would want to address this problem in a way that people could believe, because I think they've heard it from politicians forever, and they're tired of it, and they don't believe it.
What about Biden as your VP?
I would be more, to have Biden as a VP for a day and then to have him as president would be extraordinary, because I do think that he has enormous depth and understanding about the way to make this government work, and he has a lot of ideas about how to make our government more responsive to the people. He would be fantastic. The same sort of person is somebody like Hillary Warren or Bernie Sanders. Those are also people who I think are deeply committed and would excite the base. I share the feeling of many that it's time for a woman to be president of the United States, and that's why I'd like to get out as quickly as I can and have somebody who maybe is a woman who would step in and become president.
What about Elizabeth Warren?
She would be fantastic. Now, she would force me to move, because the Constitution says you can't have the president and vice president from the same state. But I'm happy to move for Elizabeth Warren. I think anybody would.
And any chance, Larry, that you wouldn't resign?
No, there's no chance.
If you won, you would stay.
The thing is, the whole measure of my success as president would be whether I lived up to my word, whether I did what I said I would do. And, as tempting as people imagine it to be to kind of hang on to the president, I think it would be an embarrassment to break your word to the American public and not to resign. So I absolutely would resign. That's the only way that I would be a success in doing what I'm trying to do, which is not about me. It's about the principle. It's about a way to get a referendum, almost like a constitutional amendment, without going through the ordinary process. Get this idea reestablished, that as a representative republic, we are supposed to be equal citizens. And if we did that, we would actually make government possible again. That's the insight I think we've got to get people to see. And if I accomplished that, that would be 1,000,000 times more than any law professor could ever hope to accomplish. I'd be happy to step down from that.